Hello, I'm Juliet Foster and welcome to Money Live's webinar, The Future of Autonomous Self-Service in Banking. It is hosted in association with SAS and Microsoft. Now, the past year saw digital adoption skyrocket with the uptake of mobile banking apps and, of course, digital payments accelerating like never before, thanks in large parts to the pandemic and social distancing regulations. Well, on top of this, customers are now expecting fast, simple and autonomous services which enable them to solve problems themselves whenever and wherever they want. So the big question, how do customer journeys need to change to accommodate this shift? And how can banks ensure that digital journeys are optimized for all demographics? How can new technologies come into play? What does this mean for the future of digital self-service in banking? It goes on really, doesn't it? Big questions which we'll be exploring in the next hour with some brilliant industry experts. They're going to be talking, so let's meet who it is that I'm going to be in conversation with. Now, first up, we've got Anthony Flack. Anthony, it's great to see you. Let me take you through the drill. What happens is that I sit back so that you can introduce yourself to the online audience and tell them what it is that you do. So take it away.
Hi there, hello everybody. I'm Anthony Flack and I look after the digital platforms at Santander in the UK. So things like mobile app, chat, online bank, digital account opening.
Okay, fantastic. Next up, we've got Tiffany Carpenter. Tiffany, it's good to see you. Same thing. If you can introduce yourself to the audience, tell them what it is that you do.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Carpenter. I work at SAS. We're a global leader in analytics and artificial intelligence. And in my role, I help organizations really compete on customer experience. I help them harness the power of data, customer insights, and look at how they can use that data to automate customer decisions at scale.
Okay, fantastic. Craig Wellman, it's very good to see you. Same thing. If you can introduce yourself to the audience and tell them what it is that you do.
Thank you, Juliet. Humbled to be introduced by you and good to share the stage here with such a wonderful panel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Wellman and I run our financial services business at Microsoft. So very much an enabler for the enterprise, and in this case, very much in the financial services industry, big investment industry for Microsoft globally. And I get to work with our partners and our customers and industry bodies every day, which of course is a lot of fun in our industry.
Okay, fantastic. And last but not least, Chris Murphy, you know what to do.
Oh, well, allegedly, I've been fooling everyone for many years. So, yeah, Chris Murphy, I'm from Lloyds Bank. I've been a design lead there for nearly 15 years. I started in the digital transformation at Lloyds. So I've seen the growth of the digital channels from the small channel to now the most dominant channel, especially with the mobile app. And right now I'm working on a strategic program where Lloyds has a partnership with Google Cloud Platform and Thought Machine, which is a very innovative ledger-based core banking system. So work through the digital transformation, through the group transformation, and now we're really into the world of the data transformation. So that's what I'm looking forward to discuss today.
Okay. Great. I mean, it's exciting stuff. I don't like the use of the word allegedly, because that almost implies that something fictitious is going on here. I'm sure it isn't. But look, it is wonderful to see you all. And can I also extend my thank you to you, because you're all involved in big projects. This is an important time of the year, etc. So thank you for putting aside the time to be with us. Now, there's plenty of ground to cover over the next hour in case you haven't worked it out already. And in fact, it's quite possible that quite a few of you will have a number of burning questions or comments that you want to put to the panelists yourself. Well, you'll be delighted to know that you can do that, because we're going to give you the opportunity to put your questions to the panel. All you've got to do is send them in throughout the webinar using the questions section, which is on the right-hand side of the web page. We'll try to answer as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the discussion and in the time available. And of course, do feel free to share your own experiences with us on Twitter using our hashtag self-service-bank. That is hashtag self-service-bank. Okay, so plenty of ground to cover. So let's get the ball rolling. And this is really a question to all of you, because look, I want to focus on the basics. What is autonomous self-service? What does it mean to you? And where is it currently being used in banking? So Tiffany, if I can start with you, then I'm going to bat it around to other members of the panel.
Yes, thanks, Julia. I think I think most of us are familiar with self-service in banking, meaning we don't need to go into a branch or talk to a human. Instead, we use channels and devices like our mobile apps, like internet banking, like IVR systems to actually manage our finances. And we're used to doing things like, checking our balances, making payments, maybe ordering a new credit card. And I'm really interested in this term autonomous self-service, because to me, this really goes beyond that traditional definition of self-service, and it really hints at a more automated and proactive service. I think we're quite familiar with this term automated vehicles or self-driving cars, for example. When you think about those, they're able to really sense their environment and drive safely without a human in the driving seat holding the wheel and taking action. And I think autonomous self-service actually is very similar. So it's going beyond that traditional self-service, removes the need for a human to take actions or make decisions about those finances, because those actions and decisions are actually made automatically by algorithms based on data and context. So if I'm overdrawn on my current account, but I've got money in my savings account, for example, the algorithm might decide to transfer money between accounts, help me avoid overdraft fees, without taking any action at all myself. I think this is quite popular in areas like personal investments. We've seen Robo Advisors become very popular over the last 5-6 years. But I don't think we're really seeing that being used in anger or any products being launched in anger across other areas. But I think this is a really hot topic and something that is the next big thing in banking. It'd be great to hear what the panel think about that.
Okay, let me jump in there because I want to get Chris's interpretation about autonomous self-service and what it means to you and where it currently is in the banking world, well, in the banking tapestry, because it is pretty vast.
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much what Tiffany said. As I say, the last 10 years, we've very much seen the hollowing out of very simple banking transactions that we used to do on your behalf. You do it yourself. But I think part of now, with the power of the data and the technology, we're starting to really accelerate what we do for you as a customer. So traditional banking, we do your interest rates, we do your payments, we do your backs, all that sort of stuff. We've done that, and that's been the same for 100 years in banking. But now, with this autonomous thing, why don't use this data, go further, so that we can take those decisions on your behalf again. So the bank moving out of just a core banking competency into actually let's predict where you are in your life moment. Let's use bigger data. Let's look at your behavior. What would be useful for you right here and now, and take the stress out of your life of pretty much mundane banking. So that's a sort of driver of actually, fly by wire in banking. And the measures. We're one of the biggest retail. We are the biggest retail digital bank. We have 4 billion logins every year. But the measure of this autonomous is perhaps now that should be half, because we don't want people to log in. They should be getting on with their everyday life, and they can do in comfort if we, as a bank, can start to take a lot of that difficulty and decision making away from you. So that's the sort of level we're looking at moving forward from this service.
Okay, so that's the aspirational side of things. And Anthony, is that your definition of autonomous self-service, that basically the bank is taking on the heavy lifting to allow the likes of me and millions of others to actually get on with our lives and not have to stress?
I think so, yes. I mean, traditionally transactional, so can you make a payment? Moving on to maybe more sophisticated or needs to be more secure, so things like change address, change phone number, where the bank has to be quite confident it's got the right data, just to fulfill a duty of care. I think there's something very interesting in what Tiffany said, which was, I think by implication I've understood, moving to proactive rather than just reactive. So with conversation, if we can interpret and understand intent, then that can very much change the dialogue, so the service and marketing dialogue with the customer. So we use something called next best action, where we're trying to consider what's best for the customer next. And that's a very interesting area in terms of outbound.
Okay, and Craig.
I'm just enjoying watching Anthony's dogs there in the background getting ready for their walk. I can hear mine crying in the kitchen as well for the same. It's that kind of
well, don't be too quick in answering the question, please.
I think, I mean, a lot resonates in what the other guys have said. I like to think as this sort of process towards autonomy as a process of evolution from kind of digitizing data and interactions through to self-service, through to ultimately autonomy at the end of it, when you can generate lots of data and insight. And I think there are a number of things that are interested, whichever part of financial services you're thinking about. And because the topic of financial services, whether you're insuring, investing, borrowing, mortgaging, is so sensitive, you know, trust is right at the center of this. And when you start to think about autonomy, even in Tiffany's example, making sure that you have the trust of the customer to enable, you know, those decisions to be made, or at least suggestions to be made, I think is an important part. It's got to drive simplicity. This has to be easier for the customer and more efficient for the institution. But I think also intelligence through the insight is critical. So the guys would tell you clearing up the data estates of a big organization that's been developed over many, many years is a thankless task. It's a really, really big job, but it's so important if you want to get better outcomes, because, you know, automation and AI across data that doesn't make sense is just kind of bad decisions faster, really. So I think that's a take. We could unpack it a lot more, I'm sure, but, you know, the journey towards autonomy and then simplicity and trust, really.
So the key words there. But Anthony, let me take it back to you, because look, we're talking about all these things, but what are the drivers for self-service experience from the customer perspective? Because clearly the pandemic showed that we want more.
Just very briefly on the last question, the autonomy and the automation is important, but we're still quite strong on the idea that there's a place for human touch. So if you're deploying the automation alongside, you know, things like collections, bereavement, power of attorney, all those things where you can automate to an extent, but it does need to be a human. It works quite nicely, so you can be very efficient in terms of your handoff. So we're not trying to remove humans completely, but it's where appropriate. But to your question, this is you know, I see a lot of business cases, and I've been around quite a long time, but the business case or the customer experience case around this is one of the strongest and one of the most straightforward. I mean, you can look at simple dimensions like 24/7 availability. You can look at things like accessibility. It's very usable for many people. People like the end-to-end completion. So fulfillment within the same session, no handoff. I've not met anyone who likes sitting in an IVR queue. And you can integrate into, you know, what we could call pocketed conversations. So not everything has to be immediate. So you can start something and sort of conversationally get a push notification later, which gives you the answer you're looking for. So there's a whole range of options, but I would say availability, 24/7, accessibility, usability. It's quite an easy thing to. It's not an easy thing to get customers to adopt, but it's an easy thing to convince around being a good idea.
Sure. We've got a couple more minutes on this particular section of our discussion, but Tiffany, let me bring you back into the conversation, because look, what we do know is that self-service isn't suited to every product or indeed service. So what products and services especially suit automated or self-service experiences, and very briefly, why?
So I'm quite opinionated on this topic, because I actually personally
like as many opinions as possible, so don't apologize for it.
With the advancement of technology, the explosion of data, I actually think pretty much every product or service should and could be available through self-service options. But it's about, you know, I think there's a number of considerations, probably 3 key considerations when I think about it. First is exactly what Anthony's just mentioned. It's about consumer choice. So some customers will feel much more comfortable talking to a human, and it depends on their circumstance. So we need to give customers the options. They need to be in control of how they undertake that transaction or interaction. And even those customers that select self-service need the option to route to a human if and when needed. And I think it's just really about designing social inclusion, designing accessibility, just as Anthony said, directly into our products and services and customer journeys. I think secondly, self-service, it just needs to work, right? And I know that sounds really basic, but there are still too many customer journeys that start off with self-service and end up with a really frustrating call into a call center, or worse, just waiting in a queue for a long time. And customers today, there's too many customers cannot complete their journey in the channel or on the device that they have selected. I think that is a big challenge today. But I think thirdly, self-service just needs to become much more personalized and more relevant. Every customer is unique. Every customer is an individual. I think banks need to harness the data that they have to be able to tailor those self-service experiences so that we're delivering the right offers, the right menus. It shouldn't be a generic one-size-fits-all. And that will actually drive more and more adoption of self-service.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, let me bring Craig into the conversation here, because I want to find out whether that resonates with you. And if you could very quickly give me examples of this where it has been working especially well.
Yeah, I think it does resonate, and what we're seeing in the industry is opening up of thinking and looking at how other industries really have progressed. And when you start to think about what's happening in health, how we use data and intelligence to kind of get us through a very difficult period over the last year to collect up data, how retailers have survived that time, automation in manufacturing, many different industries that I think we can continue to learn from. The other thing I would say on this is, let's not overthink what automation and self-service actually mean. It's collecting up data, and it's trying to make more simple and efficient processes out of very old-fashioned ways of doing things. Present data back to a client in terms of what you know about them to help them make the next best decision. And I think brilliant points made by Anthony and Tiffany there around human interaction in all of this. This is not a step off a cliff moment from human to machine. Actually, these two unbelievable resources are going to have to work together in the future to make decisions. I think one great example, just very quickly, Investec, we've been working with them for a long period of time around how they understand their customers a bit better and use the intelligence they gather on them to make better decisions, to visualize outcomes, and to understand trends. And what they do is they use data that our CRM and ERP systems produce, our Dynamics platform, that actually feeds visualization. It turns data into real things through natural language, through NLP, through customer insight. That enables them to see how the customer's behaving and what the likely next place is for that customer to go. But also from a demographic or a customer group perspective, they can start to observe trends like words like sustainability or cost saving, etc. So they start to get a better feel on where they should develop their own business model.
Okay, and Chris, let me bring it to you just to close out this section, because look, it has been referenced to a certain extent, but what has to be taken into consideration on the front and indeed the back end so that you can design successful self-service journeys for customers to avoid the scenario that Tiffany pointed out, where you can start a journey, it goes quite well, then you get lost halfway through and then give up on it altogether.
Yeah, and it's exactly right. And I think part of it is organisation, is how you measure yourself. We pivoted into customer journey measures. Originally in digital transformation, let's take something quite simple of ordering, you've lost your debit card, you go on your app, you order a new one, you measure the digital journey, 2 clicks, happy days, but it's a very, very complex business process underneath it. The customer outcome is, when do I get my piece of plastic in the post? So part of the pivoting of actually making sure the front, top to bottom, front to end, is transformed, measured, and we hold ourselves account to that instead of what was traditionally happening. And we found that as we got more and more digital customers, massive adoption, our complaints and the measures weren't coming down because the customer was bouncing through the organization on these processes. And they, one division, happy days, the digital channel's great, but then it moves over, that went bad. And you found the customer feeling exposed to all the complexities within the bank, and that's why it's all about smoothing it out front to back. And also the other great challenge, which I think we can't overlook in the digital transformation or getting to more self-service, is the simplification of your business. Banking over the years has been made overly complicated. Now, maybe various Machiavellian reasons for that, and banks that do that. But that was all right, because you'd have a trusted advisor, you'd have a bank staff to explain it to you. But one of the great things and one of the design challenges is to simplify the business processes, your product sets, your channel offerings, to make sure that it is ubiquitous. It's got to be democratic. You don't want everyone to have a PhD to run these processes. And the flip side, which has been very good in the organization, is that simplification, which generally drives the customer agenda. Because the customer, you've got to be transparent. The regulator is very hard on that, but you've got to be transparent. You want customers to understand their options and fully from that. So I think there's a healthy on both sides. It's not just for it is for the customer, but actually it drives these big 200-year-old businesses to actually simplify it and really get self-service.
Let me jump in here, because I want to move things along now, because we have touched on these concepts in some of the previous answers. What I'm talking about is technology, but specifically AI and virtual agents. What I want to do now is to look at the much deeper role that they have to play in this brave new world. And Craig, let me start with you, because look, tell us a little bit more about how automation fits into the self-service piece, because look, like it or not, it's there and it's going to increase. We're going to have to learn to live with it, if not necessarily love it.
Absolutely, and embrace it, I hope, because I think the points I was making earlier around simplicity, first off, cost savings for organizations, time savings for individuals. Most people aren't passionate and don't have the time for lots of administration around financial services. They want simplicity, they want it done quickly, 2 or 3 clicks. And that's why we're seeing this rapid growth of online management of our finances and people using apps. And this creates a massive opportunity for the industry, because whether you're buying insurance, investing, updating your account details, you can do it all, much simpler than you could do in the past. So I think all of that data saves people time and money, but it also feeds the kind of information that organizations have on us and enables them to be more efficient, because they can then make the recommendations. They can start to think about where we might want to go next. There's one caution on it, which is I think that people are progressively getting ready for this time. And I think you kind of referenced it there, Julia. It's about the partnership between digitizing technology with self-serving and how you start to put automation on top without taking power and control away from the individual. So we still feel like we're in control of our finances, but the machine is there to assist us and help us make decisions.
Which leads quite nicely onto my next point, Anthony, about intelligent automation. I mean, how might this intelligent automation really transform the self-service experience? Because we've kind of touched on it, certainly in terms of the bank's that technology taking on the heavy lifting, but something tells me that that's part of a much bigger process.
Yeah, I mean, subject to having the right consents in place in terms of what you do with customer data. And also, we haven't really touched upon open banking and the world which that kind of opens in terms of data as well. It's really using the data. I used the word intent before, so proactive and intent. So trying to identify opportunities to engage with customers which are helpful and useful. Now, there's a very good chance that Lloyds and Santander will know when someone's changed their mobile phone contract, but have they updated their mobile phone number? Possibly not. So you can put fairly helpful prompts into engagements, such as even view balance. Wants to see the balance. If you're intercepting them with something which is value adding, self-service, saving them something, and serving up a form which allows them to, in an automated way, change their address or change their phone number. It's all those sorts of things, and they sound quite unsophisticated, but you've got to get it right, and you've got to strike a very careful balance between experience and friction. Because every time someone logs onto a service, you don't want them to feel like they've been sold to. So we try and balance service very carefully in that respect.
Yeah, but then Tiffany, when we talk about intelligent automation, it sounds great, but the banks themselves, they've got to actually make that leap, haven't they? So what are the practical steps they can take to actually make the jump from automation to intelligent automation? I guess that once they've sussed that out, then it paves the way for the next leap on. Yeah,
that's interesting, because I think banks have they've adopted robotics and process automation for many years. So right across the enterprise, we've seen automation of a lot of repetitive rules-based processes and tasks that are powering self-service, but also empowering employees internally within the bank as well. And I think that level of automation has obviously delivered great benefits, but it has got its limitations. This type of robotic process automation, it can only follow logical processes. It can't necessarily make decisions, autonomous decisions. It can't necessarily see the patterns in data or extract meaning from speech. This is where you need a human involved to do that often. And Chris alluded to this earlier. You know, we can deliver something in self-service, but behind the scenes, a lot of the bank's processes are very complex. There's lots of decision points, lots of humans involved in actually making those decisions. And I think that's why we've only been able to scratch the surface, really, when it comes to automation with things like robotic process automation. And so when we move to more intelligent automation, what we're doing is actually combining that robotics with things like artificial intelligence, with automated decisioning capabilities. And that's where we can start to think about really truly transforming, I think. You know, just moving beyond predicting and giving insights to humans to make decisions, but actually having operational and customer level decisions being made by the algorithms themselves. Now, it's not necessarily easy. Skills and talent are needed. I'm really excited about this area because SAS and Microsoft have been working very closely over the last 18 months or so in this very space. So if we think about some of the automation capabilities within the Microsoft platform, SAS has very tightly integrated their AI-based automated decisioning into some of the Microsoft capabilities. So it allows anybody who's designing and developing automated customer journeys using Microsoft tools to actually call an AI-based decision directly into a journey. I think it's really exciting because it allows organizations to start to scale their digital transformation. People can use tools that they're familiar with, Microsoft type tools, and actually call AI-based decisions directly in there. So I think this is really going to help organizations make that leap, as you say, from robotic automation to intelligent automation.
Sure. And we shouldn't forget the context of the dream, Chris, because the aim, of course, is to enable the customer to complete their goals autonomously with as little friction as possible. But we also have to accept that sometimes this is not going to happen. So is this where, for example, virtual agents have a role to play?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, they've been very successfully deployed in financial services and banks over the last few years. But, you know, when customers on their channel of choice, they're trying to sell service, when they have to sort of reach out and they're thinking, I have a query here, I need to inquire something I don't understand. The virtual agents have been very good because they can scale infinitely. You know, there's very few telephonists where you call through, so you don't particularly want, for simple queries, inquiries, you don't want people sitting on a phone line for 10 minutes waiting to get through to telephonists, nor do you want to, our best resources, which are our colleagues in telephony on the branch, we don't want to waste their time on low value work, really. So the virtual ones have been really good. And also the key one is, they're a learning system, because part of it is because it's a system that gives you more data, more insight to what the customer's doing. It's very interesting. When you're in the bank, you work for a bank, it's very hard to think like a customer, even though we always want to be a customer, but we're all from the inside out. And it's a fascinating insight because obviously you collect huge amounts of data and insight from what the customer's inquiring, you know, in these virtual agents, but therefore you can have learning loops. And therefore for the digital transformation, have we got a signposting wrong? Have we got some bad design that is driving these people? Or are we missing a process of a service that the customers are crying out for? So for low inquiries, we absolutely, we said before, humans are best experienced when it's value work. Our colleagues at the front line, value work, absolutely, we want them to be in those value moments of truth. But the low value, the self-service, it's when it's a bit unclear to the customer. These are great because, again, they're available all the time. They scale, they're available all the time, and for the bank, we get a real good learning loop back from listening to, and we can listen to the customer, and we can improve our processes. So it has been a very, very successful deployment.
Okay, and Craig, let me bring you into the conversation, because look, Chris was talking about the virtual agents and their role. What about the human agents, and how do you think banks themselves can strike that balance between autonomous self-service and the human touch? Because I think we're all agreed that you cannot exclude the human touch permanently. There has to be something there to make the public at least feel reassured.
No, quite right. And I think Chris has made some brilliant points there, actually. I think a huge amount of learning for the world over the last year in terms of what it expects from organizations and how it should be served, decisions to be made, processing of actions required. And I think, in breaking news, people still want to deal with human beings, right? We still sometimes want to call, speak to a person, get their opinion, and have that confidence that someone's actioned for us. I think there's a few things I would say on this. The first thing is that not everyone will naturally move to autonomous IVR-based, bot-based interactions. Not everyone is comfortable with that. And we live in a world where we need to make services accessible for all as well. So it's just not possible because people don't have good enough internet access, the right equipment, or maybe aren't IT savvy enough to use the systems we want them to use. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is when organizations go through the process of thinking about how they're redesigned to strike this balance that you're asking about, it's really important to think about where those handoffs are. And for the customer group that you're serving, where is the right place and time to hand off between technology, as Chris was saying, for very, very transactional, or where the requirement, for trust maybe, or the complexity of the ask outweighs the need for simplicity. Working that out, I think, is really important. And then, the technology that underpins it, if you're going to automate it, it has to be bulletproof. And to continue that process of building trust with the customer, they have to know that it's going to work every time. Otherwise, it's less efficient than speaking to the person in the contact center. And I think organizations that have got that wrong double back and end up with spikes in traffic through traditional means because they maybe haven't put the right thinking in up front. So I think will always be a balance. Humans are going to be an integral part of creating autonomy and automation around self-service, but it's finding out the handoffs in between that are all important.
Okay, let me give the final word on this to Anthony, just to close out this particular session. Very, very briefly, how do you think all of this can be incorporated into existing user journeys, at the same time having minimal disruption?
It's quite a question.
That's why I think for you.
Yeah, I think Chris touched on one of the key things, which is looking at the whole end-to-end journey. And it's a very different way of looking at things because banks are complex and deep organizations. And we often find that operations gets missed off. So an awful lot of the cost in a bank, but also the potential for poor customer experience sits in operations. I don't mean any disrespect to my operations colleagues, but it's a complex place. There's a lot of legacy and there's a lot of old IT and quite a lot of paper kicking around, and even things like passbooks. So that's difficult. I think the possibly slightly different way of answering the question, or even putting the question, is one of the hardest things is to work out when to strike to move forward, because a poor experience is when you automate on the bot, but the answer the bot gives is please use the following phone number. Now, if you waited until you completely sorted your whole estate out and every end-to-end journey to prevent that happening, it would take years to launch. So you've got the opportunity cost of delay. So it's trying to establish use data to identify the journeys which have the highest instance of most value to customers, prioritize those journeys first, but also accept that just to move forward, you are going to have to move forward with a less than perfect experience, but then measure that really carefully. Use the NLUs, NLPs, use the analytical tools, machine learning, and refine as quickly as you can. So it's an iterative process. You have to teach the bots So the role for the human is not just in terms of a handoff from the bot, it's teaching the bot in terms of how to respond more appropriately or effectively.
Okay, then, well, look, thank you so much for tackling that question, because look, we are just under 10 minutes away, in fact, from questions from you, our online audience. So please keep sending them in. That's exactly what you've been doing. So add some more, get these guys working. They're up for it. And so far, just to give you an idea, we've also covered the benefits of self-service automation and, of course, the various roles that new technologies have to play within this. Let's focus now on the future, and more specifically, the new developments that are out there on the horizon. Tiffany, I want to start with you, because look, we focused on the applications of self-service, for example, opening bank accounts and also requesting card replacements. But how do you think that side of things can be taken to the next level?
Yeah, I actually think we're probably going to see almost like a two-stage evolution of self-service, if that makes sense. So I think in the short term, intelligent automation will enable banks to deliver more complex journeys and decisions as self-service options. Today, a lot of the self-service is based on quite simple processes. So opening an account, transferring money between accounts, making payments, even applying for a loan, maybe an unsecured loan. We can do all that without talking to a human. But once we get into some of those more complex processes, that's where we suddenly find we can't complete that transaction in a self-service channel. If we think back to this time last year, most of the banks were completely inundated with calls from people inquiring about payment holidays. They were announced by the government, and suddenly everybody wanted to work out, is this the right thing for me, and can I get one? But actually, customers were forced to pick up the phone to speak to somebody, because there wasn't a self-service option for that type of transaction. Now, I did notice that some of the banks introduced digital forms. So they took their paper-based form and turned it into a digital form, so I can apply online, but I still had to wait 6 to 8 weeks to find out whether my payment holiday is approved or not, whether it's appropriate for me, because humans were involved in that process in terms of deciding whether that was the right thing for me. So it's not a true self-service option. So I think in the short term, we'll see intelligent automation delivering more of these complex interactions as self-service, using more AI-driven decisioning. And then longer term, and I've alluded to this earlier, I think we'll start to see the launch of new products and services that actually do incorporate this autonomous self-service, where the algorithms do proactively make decisions and take actions on behalf of the customer. It'll be like hands-off banking, like driverless banking, as it were. I think that is, a very hot topic, but I think just one of the key considerations there, Craig mentioned it, trust. When we're building these, customers have to trust the algorithms, and they have to trust, and they have to be scalable. They've got to be robust, and they've got to work every time.
And let me just jump in here, because when you were talking about your prediction, new products in the future, which again have more than just that nod to the self-automation. Chris, you were nodding along to that as well, because look, what I'm getting at, is it in line with what you're processing at Lloyds Bank, and what does this tell us about your priorities in this particular space?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, what I'm working on at the moment is Lloyds is a strategic partnership with Google Cloud, and it's a thought machine. Now, working around this, it's eye-opening, and in my career, it's very eye-opening, because we're moving to an event-based, real-time data world. Yeah, lots of banking is still very batch. If you think about it, overnight, you have your interest calculation. Banking underneath the complexity is all batch, and it's very siloed, and it's very difficult to get the holistic view of the customer, where they're interacting, and therefore it's quite hard to go and do the next best action in a very complex legacy bank. But we've all sort of done that. Flip side into the modern technologies of data platforms that are frighteningly fast, very quick to process, but also it's the availability of the accurate, up-to-date data across your whole organization. They're all staring at the same data about that customer, all processing it, so they all know what's happening to the customer in all their operational processes, and making it available into the channels of interaction with the customer is massively game changing. And I think that's where that will be the step change up there, and it will be, you know, the real-time position. If you want to look at the real-time risks of the customer, what the income of the bank is, what the customer is doing there and then, what they have done, it's all level, and it will really sort of finish off, I think, the digital transformation, because digital transformation was 7x24 real time, but we kind of masked. We're putting lipstick above a banking system that was not based on that, and the financial services isn't based on that. But actually, when you start to apply what Google and Amazon and all these sort of real-time data businesses are, and you start to apply the banking world into that, it's frightening, to be blunt, of how transformational it will be. And hopefully we'll get there, but I'm looking forward to trying to do that.
We mustn't allow ourselves to be terrified in the process. But look, before I bring in Anthony, just a reminder again to our online audience, if you have any questions that you'd like to put to the panel, please feel free to do so. We want to hear from you. Many of you have been taking us up on the offer already, so we thank you for that. Don't forget that if there are any questions you want to put to the panel, or indeed any observations, you can do that by using the questions icon on the right-hand side of the web page. So go to the right-hand side of the web page if there are any questions or observations you want to put to the panel. But look, we're focusing, Anthony, on the future, but how do you think future self-service experiences can be designed with a range of customers and demographics in mind? Because I think it was what Tiffany said at one stage, that you cannot construct something which is a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, I think some of it doesn't change. So it's research, experiment, prototype, iterate. So to test with the customer. I think I'm going to avoid buzzwords, but hyper-personalization. So it's not just young people, old people. You've got to be very tailored and in tune with what your customers want. I think one of the real interesting, and this really is true automation, is the types of tool which Chris was talking about, give you the opportunity to iterate on the fly effectively in real time. So you can be running a message to a selection of customers, you can do another one in parallel, and based on which is converting or getting the beta reaction, you can increase the weighting on that. So you can dynamically change what you're doing based on, I guess I'm going to avoid using the word algorithm, but I'll use it. One thing I would say is that I think Gavin Williamson ruined the word algorithm for the whole industry. So we're going to have to think of a better word when we talk to customers in the future. But I think that ability to tune and refine on the fly is a world apart from what we described in terms of banks being batch. And it really does work. And a fraction of a percent when you're communicating with hundreds of thousands of customers makes quite a big difference in terms of good customer experience.
Craig, I mean, look, for all of this to work, however fantastic the ideas, etc., you need to understand your customers' requirements, what they want, but also their behaviors on digital channels. So given that, will the future revolve around co-creation, or could we be looking at something entirely different?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think the present is co-creation, really. And if you think about intelligent automation and AI, really, machines can only learn from what they see. Our behaviors today, in the present and in the past, they can start to learn and predict based on those bits of data or whatever else we give them. But really, we're already co-creating the decisions that we expect the machines to make for us in the future. So our behaviors are going to dictate that, along with, as you know, Anthony said, demographics, our profiles. So I think that's actually already happening. I think what's important is that as we're getting these, you know, super simple, hyper personalized services in place and transforming platforms and moving from batch to real time, really thinking through all of the possibilities in terms of how it impacts internally in the organization for all customers, cost of delivery, time to delivery. It's those things that are going to make sure that we capture all the bits of data that we need to make the systems more intelligent, more automated, and more personalized in the future. So I think as we go through this stage of evolution, getting that right is so important, and it's just going to make the services richer and more interesting for people in the future.
Okay then, so really good prognosis there going forward. But look, the discussion has been very detailed so far. Of course, I would expect it to be that way, but it's not over yet, because it's now that point in the proceedings when we want to hear from you, our online audience. So again, thank you so much for sending in your questions. The screen is awash with them. That's what we like to see. But remember as well, keep on sending them in via the webpage. We will get onto them in a second, but before we do that, please take a very brief moment to rate today's webinar so far. Now, you should see a link to the feedback from just below the video player on your web page. And can I stress as well that your response is confidential, but above all, it is extremely useful. So please do get involved, because it's always a pleasure to hear from you. Okay, so question time. Panel, are you ready? Okay, well, with your hesitation, I'll take that as a yes. Before I actually start firing the questions at you, everybody just take it, just go in there, answer it. If there's any hesitation, I'm going to nominate. Please don't put me in that situation. But anyway, let's get going. First question, do you think autonomous self-service lends itself to a true omni-channel customer experience? Who would like to tackle that one before I choose? Oh dear, Craig, I guess you've drawn the short straw.
Yes, absolutely. Good planning, good investments made, good understanding of your customer. Yes, yes would be my short answer.
Okay then, would anyone else like to add to that at all about autonomous self-service lending itself to a true omni-channel customer experience? What should the true omni-channel customer experience be, Tiffany?
Yeah, I think going back to what we said earlier, the customer should always be in control. But as we start to become more autonomous and customers trust the algorithms to make these decisions, I think autonomous, this driverless banking, as it were, just lends itself so much more to digital channels, because I can just check quickly on my phone or on my tablet to check everything's in order, rather than having to call up and speak to an agent or going to a branch. So I like the idea of this being omni-channel. I think anything that's happened in an autonomous way, the branch or the call center needs to be aware of. But I think it really moves us into a true digital world rather than omni-channel. It's the channels the customer chooses, and I suspect those are going to be digital.
Okay, would anyone else like to add to that before we move on to the next question?
Just orchestration. Orchestration is critical. So both ways as well, both knowing what the customer has said with another channel or done with another channel, but also knowing what we've said to the customer. So, you know, the obvious examples is you don't want to be sending an offer for a loan or a credit card if the customer's just contacted you about being in collections. I know it sounds silly, but you need to orchestrate that really carefully across all your channels. Customers expect any touch point to know what they want and what they've done, which is perfectly reasonable.
Okay, then that's great. Chris, you'll be delighted to know that this question is reserved just for you. How do you start to build out real-time capabilities? What are the main things to consider if you're at the beginning of that journey? So Chris, it's addressed to you, but please, to the rest of our panel, if there's anything else you want to add, dive in. But Chris, if you'd like to tackle that first.
Goodness, it's quite a big, I mean, it's a big strategic endeavour to do this for the banks. Lloyds is investing, and it's central to their next 3-year strategy to get to that real time, and it's part of their cloud strategy and cloud and data. And it's where you get started. I suppose you need to choose the right partnerships as well, because part of now is you want to accelerate. Obviously, we've done a partnership with Google, but there's obviously Microsoft, there's SaaS. It's good partnership to help you accelerate into that next transformation, that next data transformation, however you do that. And it's been thoughtful, because we are kind of behind the curve. There is an arms race around there, and it's how do you, one, choose the right technology, be thoughtful about that, but also have a mindset of failing fast as well. We've talked about that quickly on here, even that, let's go and experiment. Big macro experiments, and banks don't like doing that, but this is the big macro experiment. Can we go and do the real-time data? Can we get the regulator to allow us to be on the cloud? There's all sorts of big experimentation, and this is moving your organization into that, and that's what this wheel does. So I think that's a very difficult question. Thank you very much, whoever asked that one. But it is, you have to be thoughtful, but you cannot waste too much time on it, I would say. And that's why I think the partnerships in the industry, in the finance, but also outside of finance is crucial to try and help you accelerate that transformation.
I mean, look, it is a tough question, and it really reflects the much bigger journey that's going on. But Anthony, I would guess that there's a lot there that you can empathise with, because, you know, banks are under pressure to really provide for their customers. You could argue that perhaps the pandemic and everything that went with it has made us more fussy in terms of what we want.
I think the pandemic in some respects helped, but also hindered, because it stopped some of the things we did like to have done, because we need to be very reactive to the sort of fairly desperate customer circumstances, colleague circumstances at the same time. I think reflecting on the previous comment, you know, things like lack of cloud, data center, legacy, lack of API. So you can make the best supplier selection, but don't underestimate the effort in connecting it into your fairly complex omni-channel platforms, because I was going to say none of the banks, but none of the traditional banks will run off one wholly integrated platform with a nice common service layer to connect to. So it's a big piece of work, and as always, or as is nearly always, data is king. So if you haven't got your data organized first, get your data organized.
Okay, then. Would anyone else like to add to that before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here, obviously from SaaS. Yeah. From SaaS, and looking at this from a kind of an analytics and a machine learning perspective. You know, if we're going to move to real time, we're going to use all of this data to deliver more personalized, real time contextual experiences. We need to take that data and we need to analyze it. We need to build the models. We need to use the algorithms, although Anthony doesn't want to use that word. And one of the biggest challenges that we come across, that we see, is, you know, you need your data scientists, and we know there's a global shortage of data scientists anyway. But one of the biggest challenges is that data scientists will develop their models and algorithms in the language that they choose to, whether that's SaaS, whether it's open source, but it's then getting those models into production. That is one of the biggest challenges. We can have all of the data, all the real-time data that we need, but if we can't get those models into production, we can't operationalize them into the systems that Anna's just mentioned, then, you know, we can spend months looking at data and actually not delivering value. And so I think that is one of the key things. How do you get models into production quickly, operationalize them, govern them, and update them in a really agile manner is one of the key challenges, I think, for most organizations.
Right.
Today.
Let me jump in here, because I know that Craig also wanted to respond as well. So Craig, go for it.
I'll just amplify some of what the guys have said. I mean, yes, absolutely, partnerships critical to all of this, really. You're going to have to work in multiple partnerships. There are going to be leads like advisories or GSIs that are going to help you with some of the things Anthony talked about, transforming your legacy and keeping the regulator on side. The chemistry and the economics between those partnerships are critical. If they aren't working together and for the good of the bank and the bank's customers, that's a problem. I do think, like we've said it so many times, the data, you have to get on top of the data and make sure you really understand how it's all put together and what it's telling you. Because if you start to automate decision making or processes over the top of it, you're going to create more costs if it's not clean, not less. And then I think, you know, staying focused on what's in it for the institution, but what's in it for your customer. Is all of this stuff that you're doing going to make the customer experience better? Are they going to be happier? Are they going to buy more? Or is it going to maybe confuse them or complicate things? And being able to zoom out at any one time and put that lens over it, I think is just so important.
Okay, then another question here. Again, I'm throwing it open to all of you. It doesn't have a specific name on it. What is the potential to improve financial inclusion and financial well-being for customers? So who would like to tackle that one, or do I have to nominate Anthony?
It's a hot topic, and rightly so. You'd like to think it's inclusion by default, and in fact, good design should incorporate inclusion by default. and it's terribly difficult to apply retrospectively from a design perspective. If you build something badly, it's quite hard to make it accept to be good later on. So it makes a lot of sense to get it right first time. Again, tools and platforms and services need to accommodate. In fact, you shouldn't distinguish between the minority and a majority, but in some places you inevitably end up with some compromises, and it's listening to what those compromises are. So testing, listening to the customer, and rebuilding and redesigning. We use a third-party organization in parallel with all our design, just to check before we go to engineering whether it's going to be a good experience for everybody. We don't get it right all the time, but it's certainly a crossbar we try and set in our process.
Okay, would anyone else like to add to that before I whiz through the remaining questions? Chris?
Yeah, I mean, as Anthony says, it's massively important to get the design right, make it accessible. I think one of the reflections of the crisis we've had, though, and especially in the drives of sort of financial well-being, is people are now more willing to have that open conversation, because it was very embarrassing for a lot of customers. They didn't want to feel embarrassed that they're financially not, they'd hold it back to themselves until they went straight into collections, if not recoveries, the real hard processes. So it's, it's all banks, Santander, Lloyds, we have societal obligations with, millions of customers. We have to help them with tools, education, and also work with the government to really get the young people as well, it's the next generation as well, onto that sort of level of how do they reach out when they have that sort of financial need and the inclusion. I mean, to the point of even the digitalization isn't there, but we do know from all our sort of studies that a digitally engaged customer on average is up to £1,000 better off every year. The reason is they're more engaged with their money. They check it on, and that's it should be it shouldn't be a right. Everyone should be given that, and it's a tricky one. But I think as banks, we feel that, big banks, at Santander, Lloyds, we feel that because quite rightly, the government expects us to, and the regulator expects us to be that ubiquitous, that universal banking. It's an obligation. A lot of the smaller banks, the fintechs, don't have that. We take that on. We've always had to do that, but I think Corona has shown how we can organise quicker. And I think customers are now more willing to reach out, which I think is a good way of actually opening the conversation early. And it's not a bad conversation to have.
Okay, let's try and squeeze in one more question in the time available. It's not just the banks who need to make the jump. We operate in a regulated industry where banking advice shouldn't be free. If we talk about fully autonomous, no customer touch to managing their finances, or that's a strange sentence there, but anyway, what is the line between advice and self-service? Would anyone else like to tackle that in the minute or so that we have left?
As long as the question wasn't from the FCA.
Possibly say it's anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a space. There's always a distinction and a space. There is always a point where people are going to want, advice, and generally you need more advice the more risky what the thing you're considering is. So from zero risk to cryptocurrency, that type of space. Yeah, I mean, we've got Robo Advisors, and they execute really well around a rules-based, a rules-based program essentially. But I would still say, to my mind, there's a place for good advice from somebody who can interpret what the customer really wants, supported by automation. But human touch with digital, I think, is a way forward in that particular space.
Okay, then. I've actually been told I've got about 30 seconds to squeeze in one other question. So I'm going to be very, very brief, and I'd like your responses to be brief as well. What is the opportunity with open banking and autonomous self-service? Are there any current use cases or examples? Please be very, very quick. Craig.
I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think the whole industry is waking up to what open banking means. I think if you start to put the data that we're gathering on our behaviors and our finances across the top of a more kind of open banking system where others can come in and compete and add value, I think you create lots of value for businesses and for customers.
Okay, so, Chris, very briefly.
Yeah, I I mean, I think it's early days in open banking. I think some of the early players like Yolt have done a fantastic job. I mean, it's quite a difficult concept, open banking. I don't think customers have quite understood the benefits of it. But I think we'll be starting, because the fundamental game is open competition for the customers. So I think Yolt's doing it to give you that customers that holistic view across their whole financial life, out the silos of the big brands, Lloyds, Santander, NatWest. They're executing it well, but I think there's a long, long way to go in open banking before we kind of know what business models are going to be successful.
Okay, Anthony, very briefly.
Same. I think that was very well put. You'd be very foolish to ignore the open banking opportunity, challenge, and risk. But how to make it a really good customer experience, and and work also for institutions involved, I don't think it's been solved yet.
Okay, and Tiffany, final brief word to you.
Yeah, just completely agree. There's huge opportunity to deliver better customer outcomes, cost reductions, profit maximization, time saving, and it can really lead to higher living standards. But there's a lot of work to do to actually convince customers to actually take this up.
Which proves that nothing in life is ever easy. But look, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. As ever, time is our enemy, but I do hope that you have enjoyed the past hour and that it's also given you some useful tips that will help you refine your self-service strategies for the year ahead, indeed the many years ahead. Thank you too for sending in your questions. Apologies we haven't been able to get through them all. Clearly, this is one of those subjects that really has got so many of you animated, but we do thank you for your involvement and the questions. If you have a couple of minutes before you leave us, please do fill in the feedback form, which should be just below the video player on the web page, so that you can give us your thoughts. Everything, of course, is in confidence. We do value your opinion. So please let us know what you thought about today's discussion. Now, it really has been a fantastic hour of talk. We've covered so much ground, and thank you as well to our excellent panelists. You've done a great job. And also a big thank you to you, our online audience, for tuning in, sending in those questions. I think it's fair to say that you kept our guys very firmly on their toes. So in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe. We'll see you soon, very soon, hopefully. Goodbye.